Yes, I think it's very interesting what is happening in with Turkey and Lebanon. I think we have to see it within the context of what Dr. Elizabeth described very well as kind of a larger context of expansionist Turkish actions, which have only gotten worse, deeper, more aggressive, more ambitious under the AKP in the last few years and over the last 20 years, but especially in the last few years. So, what you see happening in Lebanon today with Turkey is along the same spectrum of what you see happening with Turkey in Syria, in Iraq, and in Libya and in other places as well. But basically, the creation of proxies, the creation of a presence on the ground, the creation of allies, not so much towards building a state or towards promoting good governance, but actually creating clients in a volatile situation which they can use to project power. And this is what Turkey has done in Lebanon, particularly focusing on the Sunni population of North Lebanon. And it's done so in two ways. When we talk about Turkey today, we have to remember, of course, that it is both an Islamist power, and Islamism is an essential part of its ideology and its worldview, and also kind of a nationalist power. So it uses both religion and it uses Turkic or Turkic, pseudo-Turkic populations as ways of projecting its power in the region, and it's doing that in Lebanon today. As an aside, for example, in Libya, Turkey all of a sudden, as it expanded its presence in Libya, discovered that supposedly there are 500,000 people which have some kind of connection to Turkey that are of Turkic, some vague Turkic origin. So that's kind of what's happened in Lebanon. There is actually a small Turkic origin community in Lebanon, both in Tripoli and in Akkar, in a regional area where there are villages where people are of Turkoman origin. This is not unusual. You find this in Syria, and of course, you find this in Iraq as well. And in both those places, Turkey has used these communities as kind of a spearhead of its efforts to infiltrate these societies. In Tripoli, the major northern city of Tripoli as well, Turkey has focused a lot of its attention on both the Sunni community and the Turkic community that overlap. So there's a kind of Turkic origin population who originally came over well over 100 years ago from Crete. And there's a kind of Sunni Islamist or Sunni population that they seek to support. This takes place both in terms of money, influence, questions of weapons being sent as well. All of this kind of work being done. And it seeks to fill a vacuum, I think, a very dangerous vacuum, which has been abandoned a bit by what traditionally were the great powers that supported the Sunni population, the Sunni Arab population in Lebanon, which was principally Saudi Arabia, and secondly, the United Arab Emirates. And so you have to look at the Turkish presence and the Turkish projection of power in Lebanon, directed against, not necessarily against the Shia of Hezbollah and kind of that dominance, but projected against the traditional patrons that the Sunni Arab population had. So it's a way of kind of co-opting that Sunni Arab population, as we see in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, with Hamas in Gaza and Libya as well. So it's kind of projection of power in the Eastern Mediterranean in this fringe area connected to the Turkish border. It is extraordinarily dangerous, and I think it's also connected to something which is beyond Lebanon, but certainly occurs in Lebanon, which I think is extremely important when we talk about Turkey's baleful influence in the world, and that is over the last years, I could say over the last decade, but particularly over the last handful of years, 3-4 years, is Turkey has become the center of Islamist propaganda in the Arab world. What used to happen in the days of Saudi Arabia was for many years, and I said it, I've written about it, Saudi Arabia was the great patron of Islamism and jihadism in the world, and especially in the Arab world, and in Africa and elsewhere as well. As we all know, Saudi Arabia has, for its own reasons, decided to kind of change its course and look and kind of reform itself, look at reform issues, talk at least about being more tolerant. And that vacuum has been filled by Turkey and its patron Qatar. So Qatar funding Turkish influence operations in the Arab world in Arabic. So there are a dozen satellite stations. There are thousands of Arab journalists in Istanbul, paid for, promoted, funded, coddled by this Turkish/Qatari nexus, putting out Islamist, anti-West, anti-Semitic, anti-Christian propaganda. This is directed at Egypt. This is directed at Sunni Arab Muslims throughout the Arab world. It's extraordinarily dangerous when you look at it, and I think it's often ignored. I'm going to come back to it when I get to my recommendations. Obviously, in Lebanon, that Turkish influence is very negative. There's some positive things that are happening in Lebanon that I think we should focus on as well when we talk about helping Lebanon and pushing back against Turkey. And I think the efforts of the Maronite patriarch Cardinal Butrus Rai, to promote a kind of different perspective, a kind of idea of Lebanon returning to its roots as a kind of actively neutral state, which tries to disconnect from the passions of the region and disconnect from the proxy wars of the region, is absolutely the right way to look at Lebanon. It's something that was always there. It's kind of built into the creation of Lebanon 100 years ago, but it's something that over time has deteriorated and been ignored. So the fact that the Maronite patriarch, the most important religious figure, certainly among Lebanese Christians, and I would say the most important truly religious figure in Lebanon. I mean, Hassan Nasrallah is a religious figure, but his importance is connected not so much to religiosity or religious capacity, but to the fact that he has, tens of thousands of fighters and hundreds of thousands of missiles, and is able to assassinate people in Lebanon. It has nothing to do with religion. So the most important purely religious figure in Lebanon is the Maronite patriarch. And so this kind of seeking to reconfigure and move Lebanon's orientation to a kind of more neutral, and to be frank, under that, a kind of concept that's more pro-Western, but kind of more neutral, more Mediterranean, less Arab League, more focused towards a kind of avoiding these issues of conflict, is the way to go. So let me move on to kind of the recommendations that I have about what we should be looking at in Lebanon when it comes to Turkey and when it comes to the Maronite patriarch and the situation writ large. Number one, Sunni engagement is important. And there's a temptation that exists principally in the West, but also among our friends in the Gulf, Saudis and the Emiratis, which is completely understandable, but is dangerous. And that says, Lebanon is a lost cause. Lebanon is not that important. And anyway, Lebanon is in the pocket of Hezbollah, so what can we do? And kind of washes its hands of the Lebanese situation. I think that's extraordinarily dangerous. I think one can say, and I don't agree with it, but one can say that sometimes people overemphasize, focus too much on Lebanon. But certainly it is a place that these issues are in play. Political life, survival of communities is in play, and we need to be players. We need to be working in that space. So the Sunni Arab population is a key part of the Lebanese mosaic and should not be abandoned to the ministrations of Turkey. So it's important for the United States, for Saudi Arabia, for the UAE, for Egypt, and others to play in the space and to push back against the Turkish baleful influence. Um, One can criticize, for example, Saudi Arabia years ago supporting Salafism in the world and doing that. But actually, the Saudi role in Lebanon has not been a negative one. Certainly has not promoted generally extremism. It's been part of kind of the political environment there, and it's something that needs to be encouraged. So we need to engage with Sunni Arab populations to build alliances between them and Lebanese Christians to strengthen kind of the Lebanese model, as fractured and as disastrous as the Lebanese reality is. Secondly, this issue of incitement in Arabic coming from Turkey needs to be elevated as a foreign policy issue by Congress and by the U.S. administration. Turkey should not get a free ride that it has intentionally created networks and nodes promoting extremism in Arabic, not just focused to the Arab world, to people in Lebanon, to people in Egypt, but also focused at Arabic-speaking diaspora communities in the West, in Western Europe, in France, etc. And so Turkey needs to be held account for this intentional creation of incitement. It's very interesting what happened is Al Jazeera and Qatar used to be the kind of great promoters of a lot of this incitement. As pressure was put on Qatar and as pressure was put on Al Jazeera, which belongs to Qatar, of course, what did the Qataris do? It was actually quite brilliant. They contracted it out to being done by third parties in Turkey. The bankrolling is still coming through Qatar, but is being done in a third country in Turkey, and it's being done by non-Turks. So they have a kind of plausible deniability, and the Turks have plausible deniability in that these are not Turks, these are Arab media. Don't you want us to be in favor of free press? Meanwhile, these people put out incitement to promote religious division, violence, bigotry throughout the Sunni Muslim Arabic speaking world, both in the region and in the diaspora. Turkey needs to be held account for this. Thirdly, the West and friends need to find ways to kind of empower the active neutrality message of the Maronite patriarch in tangible ways. What's happened so far has been a lot of kind of talk, kind of symbolic moral sympathy. I think that we need to kind of translate this into kind of a stronger way of supporting this community in this call. And that means tangible ways of supporting civil society, let's be frank, church-connected, religiously connected civil society and other organizations that support this kind of vision of active neutrality, and finding ways to strengthen that approach in a very, very tangible way. And connected with that, to empower those adversaries who are true adversaries of both Islamism in its Turkish form and in its Shia Hezbollahi form in Lebanon. All too often what we do in the West is we deceive ourselves. We think that by promoting good governance, which means helping the Lebanese state, which is in many ways corrupted and infiltrated by this extremism, that we're somehow making Lebanon a better place. We need to play the Iran and the Turkey role that they play in Lebanon. We need to play it ourselves with our friends and with our allies, is to build proxies, build allies, build communities of interest that are very much in sync with us. The governance thing, it will come or it won't come. It's actually a corrupt process, which is kind of involves horse trading among kind of the Lebanese elite. But there's a huge amount of kind of low cost but effective groundwork, a ground game that the West, that the United States, that France, that the Saudis, that the Emiratis should be doing. It's not about writing a big check and giving it to a Zaim, to giving it to a warlord. It's about kind of building communities of interest that support our interests as well. So those are my recommendations I would have, and thank you very much.